this very important briefing on the gubernatorial election in Edo State. As you all know, CDD is one of the leading organizations in the country that has been following closely on the affairs of the ongoing gubernatorial election in Edo State. And we have deployed numbers of observers in Edo State, and we have collected interim reports on how the election is going on there. So it's my pleasure to welcome our eminent professors. Professor Junaid is our election analyst in CDD, and of course, Professor Jibrin Ibrahim of CDD Polo, as well as our able regional director, Hidayat Hassan. My name is Awal Musarraf Sanjani. I am part of the CDD election team. So I will hand over the microphone to our regional director, Hidayat Hassan, to lead on this presentation of the interim report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the press. We are very happy you are covering us. I'll be giving a broad overview of what the key trends are and our analysis of the happening. The CDD has deployed over 250 observers, and we are working with journalists across the 18. We also have stationary journalists in the 18 local governments of the states to give us live reports. And importantly, aside from the pre-election report, we are deployed to monitor the ward level collation and the local government collation in the 18 local governments, so that we can really give an overview of this. And I think that our findings are very, very key and explicit in these elections, really. But really, I think one very important thing we want to talk about is the INEC logistics in these elections. While we note that it's very important for INEC their timely arrival is always a major indicator of how well other aspects of the election processes will be conducted. In these elections today, we observed some late arrival, such that the elections did not immediately commence in several polling units. And this late arrival is of course occasioned by poor logistics management, especially the transportation of personnel and election materials to polling units. In fact, there was a particular rack that was at 9 o'clock. There were still officials, ad hoc staff trying to move from the rack to their respective polling units itself. The issue of faulty card readers was also recorded in these elections. Across states, by Monday we'll be giving you the specific data to tell you how rampant it is. In most places it was immediately addressed, and in other places they had to pause for some time to address it. Very importantly is also reports of protests by ad hoc staff over non-payment of training allowances and feeding allowances ahead of the elections. And this, of course, impacted the delivery. I think one very important example is the Ward 6 Back Center in Obahoha local government, where INEC ad hoc staff refused to move to their various polling units, citing the non-payment of their training and feeding allowance. But of course, this was later addressed and people moved to the area. A very second, and I think that is the most important point, not just for the electioneering process, but for us as a country, is also the lax compliance to the COVID-19 protocol. Across the state, we recorded lax compliance to this protocol, and we want to say that in several instances, the wearing of face masks, of course, was actually recorded, but rules of physical distancing was completely jettisoned in these elections. There were even instances of INEC staff that were wearing the face masks just on their own chin as well. This has got, and one thing that we believe is also partly responsible for this is the late arrival of officials in the polling unit. So in the bid to immediately deploy and commence the elections, some of these processes had to be jettisoned aside the non-cooperative attitude of citizens. Now, these are important points we are putting on the table because in other climes, best practices is that post-election, the polling officials are made to take the COVID-19 tests since they are conducting public services. We hope that INEC will look into this opportunity alongside the NCDC. While important is also the need for the NCDC to know that the risk of a spike in number in Edo State is real and what can be immediately done to address this. Now, vote buying. In our pre-election assessment released on Thursday, we were very explicit to say that vote buying may well determine the outcome of these elections. And I think what we have experienced today speaks and attests to that. There were, aside from the payment of money from 1,500 up to 5,000 across several polling units, we had instances of even day before, a day on the eve of elections, sharing of Ankara, fabric and spaghetti in several polling units. And I think that my colleagues will also be showing for some of the important points we really want to rehash some videos really to attest to this. What is really important here is that the tactics of these vote buyers continue to evolve and change. And they are even adaptable. So we had instances of some polling units where they saw that there were public glare on them. They had to change to using young girls as a means of actually selling their votes. We had the issuing of tickets as receipts to take to get their 5K. So you have tickets, they just write 5K on it. So that's your receipt to be paid. The snapping of pictures and using several layers. So one person is who is trying to persuade you is a canvasser, another person is the one that is taking the name, another venue is where you take your money. So there are structured approaches to vote buying in these elections, and the two major parties are complicit in the buying and the selling of votes. But what is very worrying is that with the number of security agencies that are being deployed for these elections, alongside the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission and the ICPC, who exactly is there to implement these extant laws? There are laws already, but there are very few, I have not even seen any instance of people actually arrested for this blatant breach of the law that impugns on the integrity of the whole election process itself. Now, I think on the issue of electoral violence, we are very, very positive and happy that as at this point in time, the violence is not, as far as we are, yes, there are violence, there are pockets of violence, but it's not as envisaged. So we commend that and we hope that the next phase, which is the coalition phase, will not experience this violence. But be that as it may, some of the hotspots that we have identified, and which some have already been predominantly from 2003, 2007, 2012, and 2016 have been violent. Our local governments are still recurring as violent local governments. So our observers reported incidences of violence in Ipobahoa, Oredo, Esan West, Orion 1 local government. I think there was in Ipobahoa, Olobo, for instance, somebody is alleged to have been shot. There are also some of this violence are sporadic shooting. Some has to do with contestation amongst political parties in itself. But somehow we've also received a report of thugs congregating in several areas. So the security forces are enjoined to continue to be on the high alert and try to nip this in the bud in the next phase of the election. Now, on electoral offences also, there are several electoral offences which we recorded. Some include even campaigning during voting. There are instances of the posters, which are campaign posters, which are meant to be removed before polling, still appearing on several polling units. There are attempts by other people to use voters' cards not belonging to them to vote, but of course, they were citizens were able to point that out, and the person, somebody was arrested in Unit 3, Ekurega Ward in Hesan South local government. We've also had records of somebody trying to vote with multiple ballot papers, but as he was trying to dip that in, it was the citizens, the vote watchers, of course, responded. But how and why he actually got this is something that we don't know. It's also important to note that a Youth Corps member serving as INEC ad hoc staff has been arrested and taken away by the police for questioning. There are instances of party agents trying to assisting voters to print their ballot papers. So these electoral offences are quite rife. But I think one thing that, of course, we'll be commenting on largely during our next briefing is the attempt to shape perception in these elections. And that is something that we've not witnessed, having watched the election for several years. The level and the heightened nature in these elections is quite, I think it's heightened, and it calls for concern. And also it's a cause for all of us to be wary of the kind of news that comes to us. During the period, in the build-up to the elections, the same was witnessed, but in the last 24 hours, we have received several instances of information, which when we try to fact-check by our fake news corner, they were not real. That is aside the fact that even happenings are skewed towards a particular purpose. So where you find card readers not working, people sell narratives that it is targeted at people. Most of the fake news that have been circulated, and that we have fact-checked are not true. Really, they are not true. Like, we have fewer valid ones in these elections. So there is a deliberate attempt to actually undermine what is going on ground in the social media in these elections. And I think the next phase, which I'll be giving to Professor Jibrin and Rafsanjani to be speaking on, for me, as I've mentioned earlier, that CDD is deploying observers in I think we are doing like 40% of the world collation, and a total of the 18 local government collation, where we are actually watching the process of the collation. Yes, we allowed INEC introduction of the result viewing portal, which is already on and people are actually looking at. But the need to manage logistics, to properly manage logistics, to maintain non-interference at this next level is very, very important.
Thank you very much, Idad, for drawing our attention to the key findings of our observer teams. As she has said, we have 250 election observers deployed in all the local governments in Edo State. In addition, we are working with 18 journalists who have been deployed also by the cable newspaper and who have a lot of experience in reporting incidents. Of course, the election process is still ongoing, and what we are doing today is drawing our attention to the incidents that we have actually seen today incidents on logistics, incidents on the COVID-19 protocol, the very disturbing phenomenon of vote buying and selling. And as CDD has always said, elections is not a market. So selling and buying is a criminal activity and not a permissible election activity. And as these things are still very fresh in the mind and in front of voters and citizens, we really call on the authorities to make an example of vote buying and selling by making sure they arrest as many of these criminals as they can, investigate them, and prosecute them. As we are all aware, the build-up to the Edo gubernatorial elections was structured around the fear of violence. Idat has pointed out some of the incidents that we have seen, but we are happy the level of violence so far is not as high as what many have anticipated. At the same time, we want to draw the attention of the nation that often violence escalates after the voting and when votes are being counted, or later in the evening during the collation process. It is for this reason that our observers would be deployed in collation centers to continue to monitor what is going on so that we can report in detail in our next briefing on what exactly happened. At this point, we want to appeal to the security agencies in particular to maintain their constitutional role of non-partisanship. A lot of people have described this election as one between the federal might on the one hand and gubernatorial might on the other. We want to repeat, that is not what the election is about. The election is an opportunity for the citizens of Edo State to exercise their mandate and elect whoever they desire. So it is not a contest between the mights of some forces. It's really a question about letting the citizens decide. The collation, as we know, is always a very delicate phase in the electoral process. And in the past, there has been a lot of occasions in which collation has been used as an opportunity to change electoral outcomes illegally. I want to draw the attention of all stakeholders to the fact that if you listen to what Edo citizens are saying, have been saying over the last few months, it is that they don't want anybody to impose outcomes on them. They want to be able to decide for themselves who will be their governor. We are therefore appealing to all stakeholders to maintain the peace, and the way to maintain the peace is to make sure there is no interference in the collation process and that forgeries do not occur, rewriting does not occur, and announcing false results does not occur. Finally, there is a lot of fake narratives circulating. We've also observed fake results being circulated. At this time, it is important for everybody to be careful about what they believe. You will hear a lot of stories. Many of them are likely to be fake, are likely to be false, and that therefore people should not transmit messages that have not been verified, that have not come from the authoritative source, which is INEC. It's a delicate time. We feel it is important that this election becomes a step forward in the consolidation of Nigerian democracy, and it's possible for it to be positive and a way forward in deepening and consolidating Nigerian democracy. Awal Musa.
Thank you, Prof. We just want to express concern that despite the promises by INEC to deal with the issues of logistics, we are still experiencing this issue of logistics. So we were just wondering, when shall we overcome this issue of logistics? The idea of always having ad hoc staff that will undermine or jeopardize credible election is something that the INEC had actually assured us this time around that they were going to deal with this issue. But we were surprised to see that still this issue of ad hoc non-payment of salary allowances is still coming and almost undermine the effectiveness of taking up of this election in Edo, because when core members are protesting over the non-payment of their allowances, it doesn't say good to both INEC and the country. And INEC had actually assured us, just last week we had a meeting with INEC, and INEC assured us that everything has been under control. So for us to see this is worrisome, and we hope that in future election, this problem of ad hoc staff not being paid will be resolved. Another issue that I think it is important that INEC need to improve on in order to maintain its credibility is this whole issue of always arriving late. There was also assurance from INEC that materials and personnel will be there in time. Still, we recorded this repeated culture of arriving late and therefore slowing the whole process. So, but more importantly, at least as of this point, we haven't gathered more evidence to show the violence that has been predicted or that have been talked about. But that is not to say that there were no clashes or misunderstanding, there. But at least they were very minimal at the time we are making this press briefing. We will be getting details thereafter, because the election time is one pace, the collation is another pace, then the announcement is another pace, like Prof mentioned. When the result is possibly changed, that is when you are going to enter trouble, and that is why we are calling and appealing to both the INEC and the security to ensure that at least this time around they did not do what many Nigerians have already, given up, that every time election must be tampered, election result must be tampered. We are hoping that this time around, the police, like they promised us, because we met with the Inspector General of Police before the election, and he had also promised us that this time around, they are not going to condone anything in breach of, their officers being involved in anything. And that is why special identity was given to the police to ensure that the fake police or security can easily be detected. We hope that as we go into the second phase of this election, which is the collection, and also the subsequent, results pronouncement, we hope that the security will maintain its commitment to ensure that we have a free and fair election. I want to believe that the other, issue that has been raised, deliberately committing, offenses that are tantamount to electoral offenses, we as civil society and the media will continue to raise this issue until when we find a lasting solution to this. And part of it really is to have electoral reform that will guarantee and ensure electoral transparency in Nigeria. So we are hoping that this election will also ignite the government to quickly embark on electoral reform, because there's no way you can have electoral transparency, there is no way you can have credible election if you refuse to carry out electoral reform to deal with so many deficits in our electoral system and practice. So we hope that this time around, as we are going into the next election in Ondo, we should commence as a nation the process of electoral reform that will guarantee Nigerians' votes and protect integrity of the electoral system. So we hope to further speak with you as the process continues. But in the interim, we will be watching the video that our observers have got some clips for us. Are they ready? Okay, in the absence of that, maybe if you have questions, you can ask your questions. Okay, madam. Your name and your media, please.
Okay, my name is Governorship, and I report the Voice of Nigeria. I would like to know, you said some violence is minimal, but it's like
As of
now,
yeah.
but it's like you're projecting that during the collation, we might see the violence go up. Why? What gives you that impression?
No, if there's any mobu, there's likely going to have tension. But if everything goes well, we hope, which we hope it will go well, then we don't anticipate, that. But usually in Nigeria, when people voted something and they know that they voted this, and then somebody come to change the thing, that is when all those tensions are happening. In most of the places where you had electoral violence, that's exactly what happened. So we're hoping this time around it will not happen.
Yeah, and I think that what's also important to point out is that the history of violence in Edo, it speaks to like this. And if you have seen all our papers, we have made reference to it, that pre-election environments have always been tense. It's always been like this. It's only that it got very heightened. But on election day, the balance of power, as in the forces, these two forces, we had expected and projected that is likely to counter any form of violence. Now to the second issue, one of the issues raised by Rafsanjani, again is that where we had such violence in Edo, that was in 2007, and it was based as in rampant violence in Edo. It was based again on a perception of a stolen mandate, which the people then reacted to, and there was widespread violence. But most of the areas where we have recorded pockets of violence today is also in consonance with the history in the states. So they are not out of question. But during collation, as we all know, it's always violence, because at that point, people are trying to change. They are trying to believe that maybe they will win, they will not win the elections. And from the 2019 elections, again, with just going down memory lane 1 year, we don't have to go so far. You find that the collation process was quite heated. It was accompanied by lots of intimidation, both by party talks and such that we even had security officials attempting to interfere or outrightly interfering in the collation process, really. So hopefully, we hope it will not be, as long as the men of the Nigerian security forces that are deployed in these elections remain non-partisan and carry out their duties, which is enforcing that no thugs or anybody comes in. We would possibly and hopefully have a violence-free election.
Any question? So if there's no any other question, we'll be inviting you on Monday to give you our last statement on the Edo election. As you know, this is an interim statement, so by Monday we shall be calling you so that we can give you our own final statements as regards to Edo State. In the meantime, you are free to go and face other things. Thank you very much for coming.